All right, welcome everybody. I'm very excited tonight because tonight I get to sit back there and watch. But I want to introduce these two wonderful ladies. So both Andrea and Allison work at Long Beach Federation with me. Andrea is coordinator.
It's a working title. It's evolving.
So Andrea works with Hours Against Hate, and I'm sure she's going to tell you more about what that is and her evolving title. And she works with Alana Khan at the Jewish Community Relations Council. And Allison, as I think many of you have met her, Allison Hayden, she works in multiple departments of Federation. She works with me in CJL, and she works with Alana at the Jewish Community Relations Council, and she works at Israel Center. So two of her hats she's going to wear tonight. And I'm so excited to learn with them. I will tell you we're recording the video, so recording the session so people at home who couldn't make it can watch. So just so you know your videotape. And I'll let you two ladies take it away.
Okay, so I guess we don't have to introduce ourselves since Cindy introduced us. Do you want us to stand up? Is it okay if you stay seating?
I think, Siri, can I convince you to come sit over here?
Yeah.
And then you can stay sitting if you want.
Awesome.
When you're using the PowerPoint, you might want to stand up so that I can get the PowerPoint.
Am I in the way?
You are good.
How about
I'm
me?
sorry.
Am I in the way?
You're great. You're fine.
You're center stage.
Yep.
All right, so unfortunately our clicker has gone missing, so Cindy will have to click for us.
I can do that.
So,
Ready? Okay.
yes. So just a brief overview of what we're kind of be talking about in the class. So I will cover what we do called the audit, the anti-Semitic audit. I'll also cover a bit about the current trends. I could do a whole session just on current anti-Semitic trends, but I'll do an abbreviated one and also some current statistics going on. And then I'll hand it over to Andrea for a while to talk about how to respond to your students and some things to go along with that. And then we'll go in two sections where we'll break up into groups to do some discussion and some reflecting. And then we'll bring it back at the end to talk a little bit about some resources. So, without further ado, we wanted to very quickly just have everybody introduce yourselves, because some of them Andrea doesn't know, some of you I don't know, or I've only seen your email. And we also kind of wanted to know what brought you to this class. Like, what was your reasoning for wanting to come here besides just getting your LOMED points?
And any burning questions.
Yeah, and so if you have questions, like, we plan on writing them down, and if we don't get through to them during the presentation, we'll try and answer anything at the end as well. So, start.
Okay. Marilyn Carr. I teach at Sinai. I teach 6th and 7th grade. And part of our curriculum is the Holocaust. And of course, I'm much more aware since I grew up in a time when really I didn't feel anti-Semitism at all. And now I think I see it everywhere kind of. So I don't know how it's affecting the kids. They don't seem to, and they tell me a little bit about some slurs or something at school, but I'm not sure it's penetrated them, and I'm not sure it should, but I'm very curious about how to handle it.
My name is Shelley. I work here, 3-4-year-old classroom. And what brought me to this class, the title obviously, the world we live in is full of hatred. Just working here, hearing things, stories against Jews, being a black woman, stories against African Americans. So just wanting to learn more, especially how to address the children. I don't see it with our students that I work with, but then when I go back home, I do see questions and concerns.
My name is Haley. I work here with the 3-year-olds now. And what brought me to this class is I'm interested in how we can address the more hateful.
Can you talk a little louder? I can't hear you.
I said I'm interested in how we can address modern issues with hate in this political climate that we're living in right now.
Hi, I'm Stacy Neiman, and I teach at Royal Academy. I think we've all seen an increase in anti-Semitism, so I think it's from the kids. A lot of times they're subtle and passing, and just how you address that. And having a meaningful discussion with them.
I'm Monica Kranitz, and I teach Ghani all ages, and also same thing. I'm just an interest in how to deal with it today, and having being a parent also of an 8-year-old and 13-year-old, and just.
My name is Josephine, and I work at Ghani and Mequon with the infants, and even though that's a really early age, it's kind of like the best age because you can put young children in a room together and they don't know the difference. They don't realize the difference. Like, I just want to play with you, and I don't care what color your skin is or what your hair looks like. And being a mother of a biracial child, the topic is interesting in and of itself because I know that there are things that my son is going to face. So just kind of getting a different perspective, and like everybody said, this is a time in the world where I feel like racism and hatred has always been there, an underlying issue, but I feel like it's gotten worse as of late. So.
I work in academies and Hampton, like Mitchell was saying,
You talk a little louder.
So we working together, so at the same time, like she's saying.
I'm Sari Shobers, and I work in K-5 at Shalom. And just like in the last one, so everyone pretty much touched on it, it's a very sad and interesting topic altogether. It's good for us to learn how to, even if we're not teaching students, talk to people that we see, people like even older students that are not being, could be saying different things. It's good for us to know how to respond to that, it's a sad time, and it's good to just know what to say, know how to react, because we don't want to make it worse. We don't want to say the wrong thing that could fuel the fire,
Great. And in this font, it's all uppercase, but usually I do it lowercase. But you will often see it anti-Semitic, and that's a whole different topic about why we changed it to doing it this way. But my favorite historian and the leading scholar on anti-Semitism has petitioned for anti-Semitism this spelling. So you will see, at least the Milwaukee Jewish Federation, start using it more, but you'll see it a lot. And if you want to know what the reason is, I can give that whole spiel later, if we have time. So, one of the many jobs of the Jewish Community Relations Council is to put out an audit of anti-Semitic incidents in Milwaukee proper and Wisconsin in general. And we've been doing this consistently since 2012. We did have some off and on before while they were still figuring out how they wanted to do it. The reason we do the audit is we want to pull together what is going on and get a good sense of what kind of issues are arising, what are the trends, what are people facing, and then we report that on to national organizations like the FBI, the ADL, and Southern Poverty Law Center to put with their bigger grouping of hate crimes and anti-Semitic incidents. So we developed a system in which we have guiding principles, and we're always revisiting them, but they include things like Holocaust denial is ad hoc, always anti-Semitic. If someone's drawing a swastika, if it's outside of the context of, say, a history book or museum, or say like a temple that has it for an older thing, it's almost always counted as anti-Semitic. We constantly are revisiting these as new issues come up, such as this past year we had to write new guidelines to go along with how we deal with online issues. We take it pretty much case by case, but we have a set of topics and categories that we try and put all of the incidents into. So those are up on there. We do written or verbal expression, so that's the biggest and most catch-all term, and that's the one anything that they could say, that they could write, goes into expression if it's not specifically anything else. Vandalism, so that's graffitiing of swastikas, writing Hail Hitler on things, other hateful, anti-Semitic, and sometimes racist comments all come together in that. Harassment, luckily a smaller number than the other ones, but that's a category by itself, and then definitely a much more serious one. Discrimination, which is usually when people contact us from their workplace, or we had an incident last year where a sporting group would not let a kid participate because he was a Shabbat observant, and he couldn't go to the final tournament on a Saturday, so he couldn't participate at all. So that's something that would fall under discrimination. And then hate group activity, which is not our major focus, that we leave up to the national organizations to mostly track, but if hate groups, are acting up or distributing flyers like they did last year, that would be something we would catalog as well. So, if you click, the kind of process of the audit is it starts with reporting. And this is the most important thing to kind of stress, and I can hand these out at the end, is a little form, is should you report? And honestly, the answer is almost always, if you think it's anti-Semitic or if you heard something that you think was not right, the answer is yes. It's confidential. The only people who see it are myself, because I'm the one that compiles the audit, and my boss, Alana Khan. If it's something more serious that the police or security needs to take action on, we won't take any kind of forward action on a report without your consent. Unless it's an immediate threat in which we have to, call police for something. So that's like where it all starts, and that's where a lot of people don't realize that we have this ability to just report. And yeah, I'll pass these out at the end. We have, you can call, you can email. We also have an anonymous website link that you go. And so this is what we've been trying to encourage, is people to really give us data, because we can't have a good idea of what we're seeing unless we have good reporting. So then from there, it goes through us. So that would be Alana and I will collect data. So if we need to reach out to people involved or get, pictures or documents, any kind of data to go with it, if we need to investigate or we need to take further action, we'll do that. Some people just say, I just want to tell you this happened. Please don't make a big deal out of it. I just want you to know. And that's totally fine too. So then we take all of that, and at the end of the year, I compile it all into one massive, very depressing document, and I take it to our anti-Semitic constitutional law task force, and they go through incident by incident, and they evaluate if this incident was really anti-Semitic using our guidelines that we set up, and if so, how will we catalog it? And then from there, we take it to the JCRC board, which is our small governing committee, and they will do the same process. And then we take it to the JCRC Community Council. By the time it makes it to the board and the council, any identifying information has been taken out for the most part, so it's just solely what the incident was. And they make the council makes the final decision of these were definitely anti-Semitic. And then we take from that and we tally up our numbers and we give our final information to the national organizations. And usually by the end of February is when we put out the audit with, kind of the narrative and the data in the incidents. So let's skip ahead to some of the current data. So this is national data, and then I'll go into local data. The FBI just finished its hate crime investigation for 2018. It's down a little bit, but they also had less organizations that submitted to them this year. But of the 7,120 reported incidents, 18.7% of them were based on religion, and of those, 56.9% were anti-Jewish. So that's, for being only 2% of the population, that's a huge majority of the hate crimes. Obviously, the much bigger population is the 60% of hate crimes that were based on race, ethnicity, and ancestry. As far as ADL, which is the Anti-Defamation League, which is a lead anti-bias organization, their audit was finished earlier this year for 2018, and they also saw an increase. And unfortunately, and it's the third highest reported since they started in 1979 recording. And unfortunately, the worst statistic from them is the 105% increase in physical assaults, with the Tree of Life shooting being only one of 39 incidences for just 2018. So obviously, things have been worsening in America and in the current climate. If you flip to the next, though, unfortunately, it's not just in America. It is an international issue that has only slowly now starting to be addressed. So you can see a poll done in Europe of about 8,000 to 9,000 Europeans had such results as 1 in 20 Europeans have never heard of the Holocaust, or more than a quarter of them thought that Jews have too much influence in business and finance, or have too much influence in conflict and wars. So these are astoundingly depressing statistics, and they have obviously been getting worse. And now we can see what our local ones are comparatively. So in our audit last year, we had a 21% increase from the previous year, and 166% increase in vandalism, which was one of our biggest jumps. Of all of these categories that we found, 45% of all incidences were involved with social media, and over a quarter of them involved youth and school campuses. So those are the two biggest ones that will apply to you and what you might encounter. There was an increase in the language. It was very vitriol, it was very violent. There was an increase of classic conspiracy theories that I'll briefly touch on. But it was definitely one of the worst years we've had in a while. So if you go to the next slide, just to get an idea, here's a graph of our instances since 2012 to 2018. The reason 2014 jumps up is that was when Israel had the protective edge fight in Gaza, and there was a lot of very anti-Semitic, anti-Israel comments and incidences that came through. But without being too political, you can see it started taking a sharp increase from 2016. And if you go to the next slide, you can see by type, the expression is this one, has continued on a pretty steady uprise, but what's the scariest is this green one, is harassments and threats have shot up, as well as vandalism. The only thing that's going down is swastikas, and I will tell you why. So, we'll go on to the next one. So, I'm sorry that we're starting this out very depressing and not I'm sure what you want to hear. But just so you're aware, some of these trends that we saw from last year, like I said before, they were scarier, they were meaner, they were very personal. There was a lot of very personal attacks or calling out of students or fellow co-workers because they were Jewish. There was this idea of normalizing a hateful rhetoric that has become more and more popular, especially through the use of social media and online, and just in general an increase of hateful activity online. And then the conspiracy theories, which are ancient, the idea of Jews having too much power, of having too much control over finances, ruling the world, those have now made a resurgence as topics you see. So some of the things most commonly seen by youth. So hate graffiti, that's pretty simple. How many kids do you have that have, doodled weird things on the edge of their books? And sometimes I've had kids that have doodled a swastika, and when asked why, they said, well, it's the most hateful or reactionary thing I could think of. They're experimenting with how they can express themselves in a certain way, and they may not even always have, especially the young ones, may not always have like the full grasp of just how bad it can be, and just how they know that it will get a rise out of people. They know that it's a bad thing, but they don't really have a grasp of why. The stereotypes, that is very common. So that's where you get the kids that have heard or read the comments like, oh, well, you're a cheapskate because you're a Jew, or, oh, well, you just have too much power anyways, or don't you control the banks anyways? Just underhanded, kind of comments that the kids don't always know fully what they're saying. They're repeating back what they heard. Holocaust jokes are a really big one. You see those a lot, especially in middle school is when most schools start to teach about the Holocaust, and that's when you start getting a lot of the really bad Holocaust jokes, because it's another way, a way to see how they can express these different ideas. online harassment, and the last three kind of all kind of go together, because they all have to do with the use of online and social media. Online harassment using Snapchat, using Instagram, using Twitter to harass fellow students, to call them out, to send them hateful memes. There was a school which in the middle of an assembly, everyone whose airdrop was open to everyone received like a drawing of a swastika on their phone, like airdrop to them. There's this, I'm not sure if everyone knows what a meme is, so Andrew's like, you should probably tell people what a meme is. Basically, it is a picture or a video, sometimes a quote, that has been like copied and spread very popular. So if you like a picture of a cat with like text on it, that then is like spread everywhere, they change the text, that's a type of meme. Well, the alt-right and more hateful anti-Semites and white supremacists have really picked up on using meme culture online because it's funny on the topic. On the surface, it's very funny. And kids are drawn into that because they don't necessarily know what the full context of the joke is. They think, oh, it's funny, I'm part of the crowd, I laugh at this, and they'll share it, and then it shares and shares and shares to a point that then kids are normalized to hearing these hateful things. An example was this lady was interviewed on NPR because her son was saying, he was 11 years old, and he was saying things that she didn't know where he was getting the idea. And the example she gave was, he said, well, if trans people could just pick what they want to be, why can't I just pick to be a penguin? Which out of context could seem like an innocent child question, but it definitely was rooted in something else. And when she inquired, like, where are you hearing this? She started watching some of the same videos and seeing that these like memes and these kind of jokes started when they were younger, where they wouldn't really fully get the whole idea, but if they just kept saying it, the kids would start parroting it, and it normalizes that hate speech. Deborah Lipstadt, a historian, once said that even people who would never join a hate group of the traditional sense, when they've heard the same hateful things said over and over and over, will eventually start repeating it without realizing that it's sunk in. And it's even more so with children, because how much time do some kids spend online? We try, as parents, they try and limit it. As teachers, you don't have a lot of control over that. But they go on Tumblr, they go on Reddit, they go on 4chan, they go on Twitter, and they only need to spend 10 minutes there before they can already find some of these shared jokes, these in lexicon and languages from which to build up. And if you go to the next slide, I have a couple examples. So if I just point. This is from a guy on Facebook. His name says, pronounced, Holocaust was exaggerated. That is from a comment on a YouTube video about Holocaust Memorial Day. Oy vey, Holocaust, remember the 6 trillion, nobody gives a. This, retweeted by, who's John Cusack? He's a...
Who's John Cusack?
Famous guy.
You're so
Okay. So he shared this one. To learn who rules over you, simply find out who you are not allowed to criticize, Voltaire, which is actually not a Voltaire quote. It's a quote by a neo-Nazi in a 1994, I believe, manifesto on the evilness of Jews, basically, is what it's about. But you can see it has a Star of David. This was widely shared. I've seen this variety of meme in a lot of places. But then you also get the more obvious ones, like this, Ruhm und Ehre, which is Nazi, it's German, I forgot what room it is, it's something in honor, and it's a Nazi slogan. And this is a follow room. This was actually in Milwaukee. It was on the news a while back, in the spring, I believe. So they're learning these things online. You could go anywhere on Reddit. They could spend any amount of time, and they might even come across things like this. It seems pretty innocent. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of victory, patriotfront.us. This is a sticker that is actually all over the Milwaukee. Every time I find one, I try to write it down. Because Patriot Front is a white nationalist group. And they start by trying to recruit people to thinking that they are the victim, that specifically white men are the victim, that they're being replaced by the Jews, by people of color, by immigrants. And they have this whole rhetoric, but they started with this idea of, oh, we're just very patriotic Americans that believe in a good America. And so this is the kinds of things your students can run into, and you don't even know where they're going to start hearing it from. So that's where you need to be prepared for any of this. Seen as a joke, seen as something that's edgy to draw the Nazi symbols, or something that's, you know, a righteous cause to them, because a lot of kids, especially the Patriot Front, when they find them, the kids have been secluded. The children, you know, something has happened, and for whatever reason that kid has been isolated, he'll go online and he'll find these subreddits, these chat rooms, where people will listen to him. And while they're listening to him, they will start working these ideas into the conversation until they start spouting it without even fully understanding just how bad that base is. So that's just a little bit about what's currently going on and what's kind of happening in anti-Semitism. Like I said, I could go on I have given like a whole presentation on different types of anti-Semitism. But I think at this point, now that you kind of have an idea of how bad it can be and what kinds of things you could see, let's talk a little bit more about what we can do.
Before you jump on, because there was a lot you just shared with us, does
Yes.
anybody have questions before we move on to the
Questions
next
about
thing?
that? So
About
other things-
anything else that's said so far? Just 'cause it's a lot.
It is a lot, yes. Go ahead.
This is kind of off topic, I
It's
guess,
okay.
a little bit, but do you think that the current political environment since 2016 is contributing?
Absolutely, because we have people in position of power that won't condemn hateful,
and
yeah.
themselves.
Well, yeah, either they say things that even as Deborah Lipstadt says, she says, I will not say that, our president is an anti-Semite because you can't know what's in someone's heart, but the things that he says are seen by anti-Semites as agreeing with them. The things that leaders are saying are seen by white nationalists as validating their beliefs, and it has emboldened them, and it convinced them that they have a rightful platform to speak on. They don't, but that's how they see it, and now they're coming out of the woodwork in ways that we've never seen. Half of it is because we're in such a vitriol political atmosphere, but also because it's so much easier now to spread that message through the internet, basically. I mean, the idea of whenever you see a shooting or an incident, they say, oh, well, it was a lone wolf. The idea of the lone wolf is kind of debunked now. It doesn't exist. Look at Poway, look at Pittsburgh, look at New Zealand. They all were quoting some of the same people. They all were on some of the same websites. They were all sharing the same, hateful ideas. It's not a lone wolf anymore. They're empowered. They have easier access to spread their word to each other. And in the political climate, it's normalized this idea that it's okay to say these things, because if our leadership can say it, then we can say that or worse. Yeah. Any other questions?
I'd like to do a lot of interactive conversation when talking about how to engage with students around anti-Semitism and other forms of oppression. And so I think the first thing, one of the most important things to do is to kind of gauge our own baseline, our own temperature for how we're feeling about anti-Semitism and oppression in general. And so I wanted to if everybody can go around the room and just say one word about how you're feeling, generally speaking, about anti-Semitism, other oppressions, and as it pertains to our kids, and it pertains to us. And take a minute to think about it. Well, we can take turns where we start. You want to start?
It's here.
too, for me, it would be fearful and sad.
That's just so scary.
On the defensive.
I think similar to what's been said, concerning, frightening. It's hard.
For me, defensive and angry.
Thank you, thank you. Oh.
Sad and helpless to a certain degree. I think about, what's happened in the world 75 years ago, and I think, what can I do? And then I get feeling helpless because, you can see how these kind of movements just grow and they bloom, and so I feel like, I guess I feel a little angry. I feel really sad that our kids are growing up for all kinds of people. Yeah. Feel sad, helpless.
Thank
I
you
mean,
all.
I've gone to a march or two, but honestly, it doesn't really make me feel I'm really doing anything. And I would like to do something. I don't know what.
Thank you all for sharing. I want to go back to a point that you shared actually when at the beginning of our conversation, in recognizing that how we feel, how we as adults feel, often is not how our kids are feeling. And to be able to, first of all, identify that as a reality that, because we're feeling something in response to an event that's happened or something that our children are sharing with us, that doesn't mean necessarily that they're having that same response. So I think the very first thing, even, first of all, to know generally how we're feeling as educators about the environment, but then also in the moment when we're interacting with our students about something that has happened, to take a breath and recognize, okay, how am I feeling right now? And think about how we can, we want to model for our kids. I mean, you as educators know that we're constantly modeling for kids, and they're picking up on what we say and non-verbally our verbal cues. So that's the first important thing to do. We don't want to transfer our anxiety onto our kids. We want to create a safe climate for students to share with us. So, when we're talking about anti-Semitism and oppression, what do we think are what are the goals that we have that are going to guide us in terms of how we engage our students? What is the ultimate? What do we want? Yeah.
I would like for my son, he's 15, like I said, and he's biracial, I would like him to be empowered and know that, you are who you are, you should be proud of who you are. He's gotten picked on before because he's biracial and his hair is long, and somebody always has something to say about somebody, but to be empowered and to be comfortable in your own skin, to be proud of who you are.
Absolutely, I think that's absolutely true. We want kids to feel good about who they are in their identities, whether you're working with Jewish students or any of our other students that have multiple identities. We do want them to feel good about who they are. And I think on another note is empowered. What can they do about that? What else is guiding what we're hoping for? Yeah.
As the word said, creating a safe climate, that they can come to us and express their feelings, their situations, their concerns. So just allowing them to have that voice. We want them to be able to do that.
Right, absolutely. You touched on the relationship that we have with our students. wanting that relationship to be one where students feel like they can share and their feelings and their thoughts will be, listened to and respected. Yeah.
I think creating a climate that's based around empathy and social awareness and being able to support one another as well is really important.
That's great. Yeah, teaching our kids how to be empathetic is, I think, something that we, that is important to us from day one.
I think it's really important for kids to understand, first of all, that words matter, but also to understand what their language means. One of the things that shocked me when I was teaching middle school was that kids still use things like homo or that's so gay as an insult. And very often if you then have a conversation with them, they'd be people who are all for gay marriage and gay rights and equal whatever, but somehow that's just still a slur that they don't think they know what they're saying. I mean, there's some things that a lot of people don't realize, right? If you say, I got gypped, right? People don't connect that to gypsies and like Jewed you down or whatever. There are all these slurs that people don't even know what they mean. But I think that kids just often don't think about what their language means. And I think helping kids understand language and how it matters and how it gets heard by people is so important and so hard.
That's great. I think there's two really important points there. One is we do want kids to understand that it's serious, that, jokes, anti-Semitic jokes, other forms of biased jokes and slurs, it's a serious matter. It's not a joke. And I think, one way of doing that, helping our kids to connect the language that they're using is to ask. If somebody uses a slur, to ask, what do you mean by that? I just heard you say blank. Tell me, what does that mean to you? Is really important. I think, has anybody ever been in a situation where you've heard a student or somebody use a slur or use language and you just didn't know what to say at that moment, so you didn't say anything? Has anybody ever been in a situation like that, ever? So, I think that having language ready, having a response ready, that that you can use, even if you need more time to think through how to respond to it, having, ADL talks about a zero indifference policy. So as opposed to like zero tolerance where, any kid that says anything biased or a slur, they're suspended. That actually isn't necessarily working towards our goal. We want kids to learn and grow, and we want them to grow their empathy and grow their understanding of what impact their words have. So even just making a note, even just to say, what do you mean by that? Or, hold on, I think I heard something there and I'm not comfortable with it. Or just acknowledging it in some way and even saying, most of the time it might be clear cut, but in times where maybe it's not as straightforward, we can always say, I'm not comfortable with that, I need some time to think about that, I'd like you to think about it also, and then, leaving the door open to come back to it.
If you're in that, it's a very teachable moment, for sure, and especially not just for the student, but also for, I assume it comes up, the time it comes up in a class, but how do you feel about turning it, maybe I need to pause as the teacher, but how do you feel about turning it back to the class and having a group discussion about it?
I think that, one of the things we talk about, we have some scenarios that we're going to have you work through later, and one of the questions is, using your judgment, knowing your class, knowing who's in your class, knowing knowing how it might play out. It depends also, was somebody in the class targeted in that moment? So there's a lot of different factors to think about. Is this something I want to talk about as a class, or is this something I need to pull my student out and have a quieter conversation? So I think it depends. I don't know if that's helpful. Any other guiding, guiding goals? I mean, I think this one's obvious, but obviously physical safety of our students as well as emotional safety is really important. So that's, that for sure, we want to keep that, at the forefront. I think you've really covered a lot of it. I think the other piece is, demonstrating and modeling that I'll be the first to say this is my line of work, and I'm constantly learning new things. So demonstrating that nobody has to have all the answers, nobody's perfect. Sometimes we make mistakes in terms of, and sometimes we're not aware of language that we're using that is hurtful to people, and to be open if our students have a teachable moment for us to model what does that look like to hear that, how do we respond to it, and how do we grow from it. So I think that's really important. It doesn't mean, if we move away from calling people you're homophobic, you're racist, sometimes those things are true if we have a pattern and intent, but thinking more about what was the behavior, what was the thing that was said. That thing that was said was hurtful, as opposed to talking about the person, because it helps everybody to be less defensive. And really, our ultimate goal is for all of us to be, respecting the dignity of each person that's there, not getting rid of, this person or that person.
What if a child brings you a scenario where he or she is personally attacked, and it's not just you're using language and it's more of a personal attack. Someone brought me this, you're a effing cheap Jew. Hitler should have killed you all, something like that happened in their school. And the child really had no thick skin, just absolutely didn't know what to do. And I honestly, she told me about it. It was difficult because it's a personal attack on you. So I wonder if anybody has.
Well, that actually is a really similar, we have one of those scenarios, and when we break up into smaller groups, we'll work through a scenario like that and think through. I think there's a lot of really good knowledge in the room, and some of it is just actually being able, having the opportunity to talk through it. The other line is, okay, so, talking about creating a safe climate for students and what our ultimate goals are. I don't know, does anybody have as part of their curriculum teaching about anti-Semitism or oppression? If you can you have that as part of your curriculum. Can you share a little bit about what, is it a Holocaust unit or?
Well, it is, but it's been generalized to other things.
Okay.
It is can't you spend that much of the time that I have it, giving them some sense of what happened, and doing it different ways. We're reading a novella, and we've gone to some exhibits, and they've heard speakers. So it's kind of all different ways, and I don't know if, all I know is at the end of the year, for the last 3 years, I asked what meant the most to you in our room, and they all say Holocaust.
So easily some things that we can tie into, Jewish values like justice and tikkun olam. One of the things we're really clear about at the discussions, they are all connected, and anyone, when any one group is vulnerable to being attacked, we all are vulnerable to being, to that oppression. So, I think that there are, a lot of ways in a broader context, in the context of justice, that we can help, create opportunities for students to explore oppression and reaching across differences and how to navigate that. I can kind of rewind just to share a little bit about Hours Against Hate specifically. How many people are familiar at all with Hours Against Hate? So. How many people are familiar with Hours Against Hate? So this Hours Against Hate is one particular model of engaging across lines of difference. It's an initiative that began actually in 2002. The former CEO of the Milwaukee Jewish Federation, Hannah Rosenthal, prior to being at the Milwaukee Jewish Federation, was the special envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism in the State Department. And in 2002, she was at a conference, an international conference, and she and her Muslim counterpart, Farah Pardee, gave each other speeches. So Hannah gave a speech condemning Islamophobia, and Farah gave a speech condemning anti-Semitism. And it was a really powerful moment at that time. There were a lot of young people that were present who approached them and said, we're really inspired by by what you did in exchanging speeches. How can we be part of this movement? And that was where the idea, they said, we don't have money for young people, but we do have time. And so the idea of dedicating, pledging an hour against hate, an hour to spend with somebody who lives, looks, loves, or prays differently from yourself, was launched. And so when she started at the Milwaukee Jewish Federation, she wanted to get it going on the ground in Milwaukee because, clearly we have, this is an issue everywhere, but Milwaukee is, one of the most segregated cities in the country, and this initiative was to try to spark conversations so that people could learn about each other's differences, because that's important, and also find connections and humanize the other person, because it's really hard to hate another person when you're sitting down and having coffee with them or something and just getting to know them as a person. So there are resources on the Hours Against Hate webpage, and actually I don't even know if we included that as the, okay. That's Hours Against Hate. Hours Against Hate. Does anybody have questions about Hours Against Hate or any other comments about what we've talked about so far?
There's one thing I want to bring up, just because I think it's important as we're talking about hate and prejudice and whatever. Jews of color are often very invisible. and especially in Milwaukee where there are so few of them. And actually, there are more than I think. When I go in to visit in the religious schools, I'm actually very pleased to see that there's more diversity than there was even 2 or 3 years ago. But I often think that we don't address it enough and we don't deal with it enough. And I think that sometimes Jews of color feel like they have to choose between their identities, depending on what setting they're in. So I don't know if you have anything to say about that and how to address it and how as teachers we can make sure we're sensitive to issues related to that.
I think that's a great question. I'm really glad you brought it up. I mean, I think that one of the things that I've heard, so it's not necessarily that we say something negative about a person that is harmful to them or hurtful. One thing I've heard is that Jews of color will say they're asked, how is it that you became Jewish? Like there's an assumption that there's something in their story that, where they were not Jewish and then became Jewish, where it's not accepted as, this is their identity and they're, nobody asks me about, how are you Jewish? What happened with your family? So that's one thing, and I can, I could see that coming up in a religious school setting, and that would be something really important to, intervene on, and to say, if you heard students saying that to each other, to interject and say, you know what, Jews are diverse. Like Jews don't all look a certain way. There's Jews like in all parts of the world, and we respect each other's identity in this class. There's an organization called EDOT that was recently started. It's in connection with University of Wisconsin, Madison, and it's EDOT.
Probably
And-
ADOT. It's
Okay,
probably pronounced
ADOT.
ADOT.
Thank you. And they are, I know there's, the program has launched in terms of having a gathering for people, Jews of color. And I don't know what further programming there is at the moment that's planned, but it is a good resource in terms of connecting.
And Kai will be representing them. Kai Gardner-Mitchell will be working with them here in Milwaukee. So they're just getting started figuring out what her job and what she'll be doing. But I know they probably will want to do stuff.
So Kai took another job.
Yes.
Kai's a very busy person.
Yes. I don't know how she does it. But yeah, so I know that they will be working specifically to do more awareness and education programming. They just haven't figured out what it looks like yet because they just launched like a month ago barely. So
I don't know if it has anything to do with it, but UWM, the Department of Jewish Studies, just actually yesterday had a movie and on Jewish diversity and an afternoon lecture, and they had musicians that went on and it's a second program, Jewish diversity.
Yes.
That's great. I think there's more and more acknowledgement of the experiences of Jews of color. And I guess the other thing is just modeling for students, being welcoming to everybody that comes through your religious school doors or synagogue doors, that we can't assume by looking at somebody whether or not they're Jewish, and treating everybody with a warm welcome, whether or not they're Jewish is really important, but also just not to assume one way or the other, because we really can't tell. So I think that we had some scenarios for people to work through. Groups of, what tends to work best, like
How many scenarios do you
a lot. We have a lot of scenarios.
We have a lot of
you have options. I think we have 8 in total.
Wow. So why don't you get into a group of 2 or 3? You can decide. You want to stay with people who teach the same age group you can, or if you want to be diverse and heterogeneous, you can do that. But get into a group of maybe.
If you want to switch to the next slide.
All right, we'll switch to the next slide. It's 2 to 4 people in a group.
Yeah, so we have a couple things for you to consider. I'll hand up scenarios?
Yeah, so we wrote out some scenarios. A lot of these are based on things that have really happened, and in order to help you kind of work through how you might respond, these are some questions to ask or considerations. So one of them is you know, to make sure that in whatever you're doing, there's an acknowledgement, an affirmation of the statement, and providing some support in the moment. And you know, kind of tuning into whatever the feelings that you've noticed the student is
Marilyn can come join me. Or maybe Marilyn, you can go up and join Marilyn.
and then deciding whether, like this goes back to Jen's question, deciding whether to discuss it as a group or individually. Thinking about, is this a teachable moment for my group, or is this something that would be better talked about one-on-one? Helping a student to think through possible different responses. That goes into empowerment of our students, and you know, letting them think through some different language that they could use and some different options. And then deciding on whatever possible follow-up action you think there should be. So did you assign which ones for
I
everybody
marked
to
off
do?
each one, I just went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Okay. So yeah, so groups, if you want to work through your situation, write out some notes, and then we're going to share. We're going to come back as a bigger group and share.
Yeah, and if you, for some reason, zoom through it and you want to try another one, the bottom 3 are unassigned. So you can pick another one if you want to do it.
If you can read the scenario first and then share.
All right, our scenario was the second one. A 3rd grade student says that she saw on the news that a synagogue in another city had been vandalized with swastikas. She then asks if that is why there is now a security guard outside of her synagogue.
So you just want a response?
Yeah, think through like what you talked
We
about.
can tag.
Yeah.
So, you know, we really talked about, you know, if for a 3rd grader, you know, one thing to talk about is like what is age appropriate to talk about in a 3rd grader, as well as their class. You know,
Perspective. So instead of that we're placing, makes us feel kind of throwing it back at her, or if we're having a discussion, which was the next one with the whole group, which I think we talked about could be the whole group discussion, and talking about how it makes them feel, and again, talking about just that symbols actually doing things that don't make them, you know, if we write something down, if we do something that really can affect people, and what else do we say?
just how do we strike that balance of trying not to scare the kids versus how to make them feel safe? So we're grappling a bit with that. Again, especially because you're talking about 3rd graders, you know, 8-year-olds.
Right, and asking them why do you think we need a security guard? What's the security guard for, instead of maybe directly answering them, and letting them come from that, from their perspective.
And thinking about a follow-up action, which I wasn't sure if it was realistic or not. But, you know, perhaps do we invite in someone from the synagogue or invite in the security guard to talk about, you know, why that person is standing outside. To get what is their job, and this person's there to protect you, and
Does anybody have questions for this group? Any thoughts about, you know, their question about balancing taking the issue really seriously, you know, the seriousness of the issue versus, you know, supporting the child to feel safe. Any thoughts about that?
Well, you know, unfortunately, kids are so used to all these drills that they have in school that security, I mean, it's upsetting to us as adults, but they unfortunately experience it in the drills that they have regularly. So,
I had said that, you know, what we had said that the kids feel this is just really normal part of their routine until I get the email, because whenever they do these things, you know, the parents get the email from the district, like, we did this drill today, you know, am I feeling more panicked than the child? This is just normal. So,
But that's the scariest thing, is that it's just normal,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You know,
Just
every
gonna
time
say,
we
I don't
see
like
another
it.
school
Yeah.
shooting on TV, and it just, they say, they've been talking a lot about how this generation is gonna be when they grow up and what kind of PTSD they're gonna have. I mean, I think of my parents' generations, you know, had to do duck and cover to hide from the nuclear bombs, and now we laugh at that, right? Like going under your desk was not gonna protect you from a nuclear bomb, but what are these kids gonna be saying when they grow up, and that they were scared to go to school, you know? It's a little terrifying.
We had a lockdown at my son's school recently because one of the, when he's in high school, like one of the kids got caught with the BB gun in the car, but they didn't know if it was a real gun, and it was a big thing. And like you said, that's normal. Like, you know, our normal back then versus now is different.
Yeah, like I'm actually in the generation that was immediately after Sandy Hook. So having those drills was a new thing when I was in school. And to this day, it made me more paranoid about when I would go into a room, like if something happened, how would I get out? Where would I hide? Because that was something they taught us. And for the longest time it was, I didn't realize I was doing it so much because that was just, you know, the reality at the time. And it's even worse that now it's become normalized for the younger generation to have to deal with that. And it's just completely different from what my school was like and what your school was like.
Yeah, and so I think, you know, in terms of balancing, you know, acknowledging the severity of anti-Semitism and vandalism and, you know, threats, versus balancing, you know, helping to support them and feeling safe. I think that talking about the things that we can do, so again, talking about, you know, yes, having a security guard, as somebody who, you know, talks to everybody to make sure they're supposed to be in the building, developmentally appropriate things, you know, sharing, like, yes, our synagogue is doing things to keep everybody safe and to keep the building safe. I really liked your idea of trying to connect in some way with the security guard. It could be something really positive in terms of, like, you know, doing something, showing appreciation to the security guard, or getting to know that person just as a person. Like, what are they interested in? What do they like? What is their name? Another thought I had, because anytime that you can give your students an opportunity to do something positive, is, you know, thinking about, well, what might we do for the people at the synagogue who had the vandalism happen? Could we write them some cards, or, you know, and giving your students an opportunity to talk through what can they do that's positive. That's great. Thank you so much. Next group that wants to share.
An 8th grade student said that 2 friends of his were teasing him by throwing pennies at him and asking him if he liked gas stations. He said that he did not want to tell any teachers at school or his parents because he knows his friends are joking and he doesn't want to get them in trouble, but it is obvious that he is upset. And we said that it kind of like, we're wondering who he chose to say it to, like
Who did he
confide in?
Because that would change it a lot for me. To his friends. To me, I guess we thought that, like, okay.
No, I think that's in all the scenarios, you're the teacher and the student is telling this to you.
I guess whether I was a friend or a teacher, we were saying we kind of would be the same in the sense that we would try to empower him and see, like, where his confidence level was. You know, if they're friends and they were joking, you might want to talk to them one-on-one or in a small group, depending on his or her comfort level. You know, saying that, I know that you're joking, but I find this hurtful because this is how it's making me feel, you know, even though it's not intended that way. Because, like I said, and then we talked about, well, what if he's closer, if it's like 3 boys or 3 girls, is it possible that he's closer friends with one versus the other? So they might want to do it at a one-on-one as opposed to in a group setting we were talking about. And then we talked about the possible responses that they may become defensive. You know, they may, oh, we were just kidding, you know, you're making a big deal out of it. Or they may be empathetic or sympathetic, and you know, which would be hopefully the optimal thing that they would come to, right? That it was hurtful and apologize. That the behavior might not change, that they still may continue to do it even after it was addressed. You know, kind of depends on the person. A follow-up action, I guess just follow up with the child and see like how is the relationship. You know, the dynamic with the other kids, has it gotten better, has it stayed the same? It would depend, like, is it getting more severe? Then you may want to step in and recommend that they talk to a parent or, you know, to confide.
Great, thank you. Any thoughts about what they shared or any questions you have for them?
I have trouble with this one.
I said we got it hard when we tried to do another one for extra credit. I'm like,
only because I've lived through this, and the problem that I have is that, like, when my daughter, I know this has been videotaped, but when
or somebody,
somebody in my
household,
you know, when they come to you, they don't want to be in that situation where they have to defend themselves to their friends. You know, it becomes a social issue, and you know, what do you tell, you know, that student when it happens to them, they just don't want to, you know, they're 8th grade, it's an awkward time, and they just don't want to stand up to their friends.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
like I said, I lived through this one.
Right, it's complex because there's all kinds of social dynamics that play into it.
Yeah.
One thought, I mean, I think asking the student a lot of questions to let the student talk through and be as empowered as they can is helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And also just acknowledging that you're really glad that they felt comfortable sharing with you. You know, one of the things you could ask is, is anybody else seeing this? Like, are there any other friends that you think also don't like this behavior? And is this something that you know, could you ask a friend to be an ally to you? You know, sometimes, you know, they know the friends really well and the dynamics, so they may be able to identify, you know, this friend is a really, you know, really strong person who speaks up for what he or she thinks is right. I could actually ask that person to you know, help me out with this.
I think it's kind of tricky because, let's say a teacher knows about it. It sounds like this child's been bullied. So, you know, to just not, even though the student really doesn't want to deal with it, I mean, you're kind of in a difficult position, not ignoring it, but maybe putting it in the student's hand if you feel like it's, and that, you know, probably depends on the severity, how it's done, but I think that would be something to think about too. Can allow the bullying to go on, because that can escalate or get worse for other students.
I think that's a great question to have in your mind, to know, you know, this could be playing out, there could be different dynamics here. It could be a bullying dynamic, it could be really friends joking around and, you know, these friends are inappropriate and they're testing the waters. One thing you could also ask the student is, are there any teachers that you would feel comfortable sharing this with? Somebody who's more internal to the school situation, that would have a better sense of what the actual dynamic was, and helping the student to identify another adult that they would feel comfortable with. It is a really legitimate concern that students are concerned that they're going to be identified as somebody who tattled. So if they're not willing to say something themselves, or if they're saying, you know, if they're telling the students to stop and it's not stopping, that is a legitimate concern. I think that if we do end up sharing with a parent or sharing with the school directly, being really clear with the school that you want to make sure that your student's identity is protected and that they keep that in their mind, because it's not a given that schools will keep that in mind.
It's a whistleblower.
Right. And we're not seeing the best role modeling at the very top in terms of how do we protect people who call attention to something, that's harmful that's going on.
I saw this happen with my kids at Nicolay, and the thing about the cord to pick up the penny, and it happened during class in front of a teacher, and the teacher didn't say anything and went on. And so then someone in the class went and complained to the school administration. School administration talked to the teacher. Teacher came into class the next day and said, well, this happened yesterday and I really should have said something and I didn't, and it's not appropriate, and here's why. And apparently a few minutes later, teacher leaves the classroom. Kid who had said it the day before looks around the classroom, says, oh, there's no one Mexican in the room, so now I could say something about them. Literally says that out loud, and then gives a slur against Mexicans. So, it is hard. So even if you do report and you go through the right channels and the teacher has the conversation and says all the right things, it's not a guarantee that things are going to change.
Right.
Because I think.
So I think in that regard, also asking the student to talk through what are some different things you could say. So thinking through specific language so that it's ready in the moment. Because I know that I've been there in a moment where I didn't have language ready. And so then it's harder to respond at all. But even just something really simple, like cut it out, this isn't cool. Something really, really simple where they're speaking up and that you are supporting them and saying, it's not right what the student is doing. You don't have control over whether or not they're gonna stop, but it's gonna mean a lot to the person who is targeted if you do speak up and say that it's not okay.
But don't you think it's important to encourage kids to represent themselves? I think in a way they should be praised for being courageous enough to say what they view as a wrong. Oftentimes things go on in a class and you can tell that it's bothering somebody and they won't say anything. And then this happened in my classroom actually, and after the class went on and did something else, this little girl came up to me and she told me what she was unhappy about. And yeah, she was in a way tattling about what went on. But the other part of it was, I wanted her to feel that what she did was good. She was advocating for herself. And that's what I wanted her to come away with, that she should feel good, that she had the strength to do what was the right thing. I think too many times they get intimidated, and then I think we do an injustice by just saying, okay, we'll take care of it. I think they need to be praised for having we see it in our national politics. People have to come forward and see what is wrong and not be afraid to say it. And then it's up to us as adults to handle it in such a way as to protect them too. So I don't know, that's just something that happened in my class a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple things I want to say to that. One is, because those are really good points. One is when we praise a student for speaking up about, a slur that's being used, or for even going to an adult, we need to make sure that we're not praising that student in the earshot of other students. That is something that's happened that is, we don't think about that as outing the student, but it is. So that's really important to keep in mind. And there's lots of ways that we can discreetly, talk to a student if we want to, share something with them privately and encourage them. I think that we need to do two things. So if we are, as the adult, if the adults in the room are observing a behavior, a slur or a behavior that's discriminatory, we are the ones in the most position of authority. So if we don't say anything, we send a signal that that's okay. We also need to give our students the tools and help to build them up so that they can speak when there's no adults around, because those scenarios also happen. So I think it's like a both and I think, you know, I think that talking students through their options and letting them have some agency in terms of what they choose to do based on, you know, you help them think through some considerations. The agency itself is empowering if they get to be the ones to decide that. And number two, I mean, kids don't all of a sudden walk one day. They don't go from being born to walking. The goal is eventually we want them to walk. So we can acknowledge that wherever a student is, you know, they may feel comfortable just telling an adult privately one day, but eventually, you know, they may be more comfortable to speak up in the moment. Great.
But I think what you said about giving them the tools is really important. That not only is it, I mean, they could be at school and no teacher around, but they could also be like at the mall, or they could be, you know, places where, you know, off school property where these things are happening. To have those, you know, be equipped with that script, that elevator speech, what they need to.
Right, absolutely.
Deal
Have
with
it
the
thinking
situation.
through language.
Yeah.
And kids will be, I mean, there's stuff they're gonna say I would never say that. You know what I mean? There's sometimes I try to suggest things to my kids, you know, that they might say, and they're like, what are you talking about? So they know the language that might feel comfortable to them, but they may not have gone through the process of thinking through what that is. And there's usually not just one right choice. There's a range of things that would be, you know, acceptable and proactive. Who do we have? Do you guys want to go next?
Okay, we have the first one. It says, a 6th grade student says that during a social studies class that Muslim classmates said that Jews are killing Muslim children in Israel, and then muttered under his breath so no one else could hear, "Stupid Jews." She has already told the guidance counselor and her parents. And so we were talking about how initially we would acknowledge that situation by saying, I'm glad you went to talk to your parents, I'm glad you talked to your guidance counselor, that really shows me that this is important to you and it's something that we can work through together. We also talked about how we would probably discuss this individually with the students involved, just so we're not singling anyone out in front of the whole class. And we noted that if we wanted to approach it as a group topic in a 6th grade classroom, maybe we would talk about some of the issues that were going on, but just not point out who brought them up or even that they were brought up at all, just more as like a social studies lesson. This is what's happening to a certain extent, maybe not getting too detailed, but just talking about injustices in the world.
Follow-up action, was that we would talk to the parents to see what strategies or tools or discussions they came up with and see if we can work together and be a support system for the child.
Thank you. Does anybody have questions or thoughts?
What are your thoughts on bringing up, you might have said that and I just, you know, but what are your thoughts on bringing up, you know, what is going on, like you said, in the world, politics, like kind of delving into, not, you know, talking about feelings and, you know, and just, again, this idea of making the kids feel safe, but just bringing up politics, just to straighten out what's going on.
I think definitely start with whatever age group you're working with and make sure maybe your conversations aren't getting too intense and make sure it's appropriate for who you're talking with. And approaching the situation, making sure that your, like, maybe your political views or your emotions are not very clearly seen, like keeping it fact-based.
That's a challenge today,
I was just
right?
gonna say, I think
Because
we're really
wherever
challenged.
you're teaching, you're gonna have parents who are on both sides of the aisle. You know, and we're talking about Middle East conflict, especially, you're gonna have parents who are on both sides of this, and you don't wanna put yourself in a position as a teacher where you're alienating parents in your class. Because what the kids are gonna be saying in 6th grade is gonna be whatever they're hearing.
Yeah, and there's really a neutral stance, you know.
There really isn't.
And at first, we had approached it from, we thought that this happened, we thought the child and the other child were in the same classroom, not that the child that came back to the school told us.
Right.
So when we initially approached it, we talked about talking to the other child, seeing why do they feel the way they do. We also need to acknowledge that. Then we learned that it was written differently and that the child was coming back telling us, still trying to get the child to see, not that it was right for that other child to make the comment, but try to get that child to understand, okay, this issue is bothering that person also. You know, so trying to get that person to see things from another person's perspective.
Do we really want to do that? I mean, we could get into some moral relativism here. Do we want to see the point of view of somebody who says kill the Jews?
No, not.
Is that what it was? Kill the Jews?
No,
Or-
that's not
Stupid
them
Jews.
Stupid Jews. But what I was saying was, can you see how this person may have felt? Not that the comment was right, and then I was giving into an example of how, with my 3 and 4-year-olds, how Johnny hit Sally Sue. And so usually the teacher yells at Johnny for hitting. But do we actually sit and take the time to talk to see why did he hit her? Maybe it was something that we missed. So I was just trying to say, at first when we thought it was the teacher having both the kids, seeing things how, you know, acknowledging that person as a human, you know, not just not acknowledging that person also, and again, not that it was right, because if we can get to understand that person, maybe talking to him or her sometimes makes a difference, you know. Not knowing that home life or whatever, but just getting that student to understand, like, hey, we understand that this is bothering you, but can you see how it's affecting this person? You know, let's not make comments, let's give that person tools and things that they need also.
So, I mean, one of the things I think that this brings up is when you have somebody from one marginalized population that's then saying, you know, saying oppressive or biased things about somebody from another marginalized population. And I think something that's helpful is to point out to both students that it's not going to be acceptable in our class for anybody to, you know, call people names or say a group is stupid. We're going to say that for you, and we're also going to say that for you. No, that's not acceptable in this class. I think separating out, it is complicated. I don't know if anybody's hearing any of this from their students, any kind of inflammatory, you know, interactions based on what's happening in Israel. I don't know, is anybody hearing any of that their students are bringing to them? I think something that, and you can, you know, if somebody disagrees with me, let me know. I think, you know, given that tensions in Israel are rising, that sometimes, you know, if there's Muslims or, you know, people who have family that are Palestinians that are upset about that, to acknowledge that's what's happening. That's not okay for them to, you know, make the remark that they made. I think understanding the context that they're operating in and helping them to, you know, find a more appropriate way to process their feelings is the direction that I would go. Do you have any other thoughts about, it's really hard to, I mean, I don't know to what extent students can understand a dual narrative, you know, that people can.
Most adults can't, so I don't know what kids are going to do with it.
But do you take that as a teachable moment, you know, and talk about the different perspectives, and I guess that's where, because that's where I'm kind of wondering is, they're sixth graders. Do you talk about, is this the place where you talk about what is the Muslim religion and,
Could you,
you know what I'm saying? I'm really tired. I'm having trouble.
Could you approach it by acknowledging that whenever children are killed, regardless of who they are, it's a sad situation, and maybe use that as the starting point to. I hate to say fake news. We don't know really what's happening there, but we all feel bad when we see children murdered or killed or whatever. I don't know, sort of, because maybe that was the motivation in his statement in the first place, that he felt for these kids. I don't know. I'm not a psychologist, I don't know.
But do you, I guess, going back to take it as this more of a positive, flip it, like a positive spin of like, this is a teachable moment, let's learn about each other's religions and let's, learn about.
I think when you
Is
start
that-
talking,
I
I
think
think
that
when you
that's
start
sensitive.
talking about
Yeah.
politics
Yeah.
in the classroom, it's,
I think it depends on what setting you're teaching in, right? I mean, if you're teaching in a Jewish school, this is not going to be the question. If you're in a public school, then part of it depends on how your school is going to feel about you approaching these issues. I mean, they're not simple at all. I guess I would say that in that situation, I would try and diffuse the situation and make sure the person felt listened to and make sure that the other person's not saying such horrible things. And then I would go to my principal or my, whoever's in charge of it and say, okay, here's the situation. Because you have to address somebody's feelings and make sure that they feel heard immediately, but I don't know that you need to address all of the questions immediately. Like some of it you can say, this is really important and I want to come back and talk about it tomorrow.
Right. And I think also acknowledging that adults have a difficult time talking about, the Israel-Palestinian situation. It's very complicated and people tend to have really strong feelings about it. So acknowledging some of those truths about it and saying, and in our class, we are not calling groups stupid. We are not saying, anything, we're not calling any group mean names.
Or any person, hopefully.
Or any person, right. That's a tricky one.
Right. Ours was, a parent of a first grade student asks you for advice about the following. The child is asking if Santa will bring a gift this year because kids at school are telling him that if he doesn't get gifts from Santa, it's because he's been a bad kid. So, in my class, we were making challah covers in my K-5 class, and a kid drew a Christmas tree on the challah cover. And we kind of just said, we're at Sunday school, like Jewish Sunday school, we're kind of only going to be doing Jewish things here in this setting. So we gave him a new one and he redrew it. And I think we kind of made it like plain and simple, like we're learning about Jewish stuff here, but at home you can kind of do, what you want, but here we're doing this right now, like, I don't know if that was the right thing to do, but it just kind of caught us really off guard, like, and we didn't want to make it a whole class thing, because who knows what the other kids are celebrating at home. So we kind of made it as like, we're at Sunday school, we're gonna do like Jewish holiday things here. What I did at least. What do you guys think? Any comment? Yeah.
I mean, I think it gets at, and it depends, maybe the child's family and their particular situation, and it could be a way of exploring their own identities, especially if there's,
I didn't know. Michael and I we don't really know everything in our class family background, so we didn't know if it was, we didn't know if it was like a joke, we didn't know, because we were doing with like an older class and they were kind of like joking about different things. We didn't know it was like to get a tent. We didn't really explore it, but maybe if they were signed for K-5, but maybe if it was first grade, I guess I could have explored it a little more about, I guess we could have asked more questions.
Well, I think that you, it sounds like you definitely tried to avoid bringing any shame into it, which is probably the most important thing to do.
Right.
And I have a feeling that probably you could ask 10 different teachers of what they would have done in that scenario and get some different answers.
Right.
Any other thoughts or questions about that scenario?
Can I throw out another scenario that's unrelated? I'm looking around the room and seeing all our preschool teachers, and I'm assuming that even the 4-year-olds are not going to come in and say any racial or religious slurs. But you got a lot of parents. So what would happen if you're in the hallway and you overhear a person, an adult, making, it could be a teacher, it could be a parent, saying something anti-Semitic, maybe that wouldn't happen to the J, maybe it'd be a racial slur, could be to another parent, or it just could be they're joking around and you overhear it. What do you do in that situation? And hopefully it never happens. Hopefully you've got all such wonderful parents that it would never happen, but again, in the climate we're in and the variety of parents that we must see.
Anyone have any thoughts?
That's a tricky one because you don't want to, because you're still, even you as a teacher, you're still trying to, you don't want to step on so many toes with your kids' parents because you don't want to make them upset or them complain to even your boss about, your worker, talked back at me and I'm like a parent because it's still, we're still taking care of their child, but something should be said, maybe even to your boss so they can say something, just say something. I don't know how we go if we said something to the parent, but something should be said.
I would probably go to my director or somebody in charge first and, kind of maybe run past them what your thoughts were. Okay, even though, let's say it's you working in a Jewish center, but somebody made a comment about somebody that's of color or whatever, that, whether you're Jewish or not, we're all welcome here, and, at the end of the day, we all believe in a God and a higher power, and you're here to treat everybody with respect, be it so, and we're trying to model for the kids, so we ask that, kind of whatever your thoughts are or your opinions, you kind of keep them to yourselves,
You would say that to the parent, or you'd ask the director
I would
if your director said okay?
Otherwise, I would, do it with the director, but that's kind of how I feel.
I think another question is thinking about, who was around? Did anybody else hear
Right.
it? And making sure that we talk to any person that may have been targeted.
And did kids hear it?
Right. So if there wasn't, then it's easier to say we're going to say something in private. We're going to figure out how to address it privately. If there were people around, then it is, I think, we not only think about the message we're sending to the person who said it, but to everybody else who heard it. So I think I think you touched on something really great. This is a safe and welcoming school for everybody, and we're going to make sure that everything that we say reflects that. It's not super confrontational, but it doesn't let it slide.
Because like you said, if other parents heard it, then they may go to the director or somebody and be like, hey, I heard this person saying, so you really should, at any cost go to your superior so that they kind of know the situation, and that you kind of have to tread carefully.
I want to thank Allison and Andrea for an amazing class. I don't know about you guys, but I learned a lot, so I really appreciate you doing this for us.
So if you want to just end if there were any final just general questions about anything that we didn't answer, follow-ups, and then really briefly we'll talk about the resources
Great.
that we brought. So first we'll go with if there were any questions. And of course, if you obviously takes a lot to process, and she can forward it on to either of us, and we'd be happy to help. And if anything does come up in the future and you really are not sure, like, you can email Andrew, you can email me. You know, we are a resource regardless, you know, outside of just one class. So, the resources, speaking of, that we brought are 3 general websites that we recommend, and I will pass this out. Here, just take one and pass it. So ADL, Anti-Defamation League, Jewish organization. It is basically, there is actually two slides. Yeah, leading anti-hate organization. Some of the things that they provide are data reports. They have a database of hate symbols, so if you have kids that are doodling things that you're not quite sure what it is, you can sometimes look up what those things are. They have lesson plans, classroom resources, book lists, which are really great, and training. They do training. So it can be a little intimidating to go to ADL's website. There is a lot of content there. So we put below 2 specifics that are really great. One is the Pyramid of Hate, which is their idea of talking about how, you know, inherent biases leading all the way up through different levels of hate and how you can address those and recognize those. And then they had a section about early childhood FAQ and kind of when things come up in early childhood education, like how can you address these, how can you conceptualize and think about these and respond to them. The other website we recommend, Teaching Tolerance, is from the Southern Poverty Law Center, which is another great organization that tracks hate crimes and does a lot of proactive specialty. I don't really listen for me. Yeah, so they also have a bunch of lessons plans. They do actual training and webinars that you can sign up for. Some of them are free, some are not, but almost all their resources are free. And they have a magazine you can also sign up for, and other various articles and related lesson plans. And down at the bottom, specific one that we put there, which especially responds to kind of this, you know, hateful time, is Teaching Tolerance has a section called When Bad Things Happen, how to help kids navigate our sometimes violent world. And it gives you ways to address, you know, awful situations and these mini traumas, and like Tiffany said, possible future PTSD that these kids might have, how to address that now and how to talk to them about it. And the last one is Facing History in Ourselves, which again has a lot of the same resources. It's mostly lessons plans. They actually do a bunch of professional development specifically that you can sign up for. And then they also are ones that do a lot of webinars. And they have a lot of really great lesson plans on very specific topics. And at the bottom, one other additional thing that we stuck on there is 12 kids' books that combat anti-Semitism. It's from the website Today's Parents, but they were just like some examples of some really great childhood books that really, in a simplistic way, address anti-Semitism and how to fight against it. So these are just kind of a couple things that we put down. Zippy will be sending out an email with a few more links that Andrea and myself have compiled, articles to read, lesson plans to look at. And honestly, you know, it is kind of overwhelming to pull up one of their websites. So if there's something specific you want addressed, some specific topic, some specific lesson, ask us. We might know more about what is actually on that website if we don't have the time to sit and go through, you know, pages and pages and pages of resources.
Can we also email out the slideshow and the scenarios?
Yeah.
We'll send it all out.
Yeah.
I know that you guys know that I'm usually really good at emailing out the assignment and the evaluation the next day. I have to leave town tomorrow, so I'm going to do my best, but it might be next week.
Yeah.
It will come. I won't have forgotten. I just, yeah.
Life happens.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then one additional thing, if you're interested in taking it, I also have the guidelines to reporting anti-Semitic incidents. So I would encourage, actually let's just pass them around.
Yeah, and we'll email that as well. If you can email me all the stuff that
Okay.
I can send.
Yeah, I have all of that. So that's
Yeah, I think the other main thing that is coming up that I am working on is bringing in ADL to do their words to action training. This is for Jewish students and parents. I think at 5th grade and up. And so we're working on coordinating with youth groups and religious schools to get dates on the calendar where they can give that training for our students and parents.
And also our book club, The Hate You Give, which we're doing together with JCRC and Tikuna Ear, is really, in terms of racism and all these topics, really good. Does somebody have the dates? Somebody got the list in front of them of the dates?
Yes, on the sheet over there. It's in February. January. Excellent. There's so many things coming up.
January 15th. January 15th, so hopefully you'll come to that. And in case you didn't grab the sheet, we do have lunch and learns we're starting this year. So those are worth 1 LOMED credit, but they won't have any homework. So,
Are they all 1 to 2?
Yeah, they're all
Yeah.
at 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock.
thanks everybody.